The storm arrived like a rumor that turned out to be true. It started as a smear of cloud over the marsh, then a bruise across the sky, and finally a full black lid slammed over the town so quickly the lamps forgot how to be brave. The railway bell at the junction coughed once and fell silent. That was the first sign. The second was the moment all the clocks in the parish tolled the half hour at the same time, though one had always run a minute slow and another 3 minutes fast, and no one could ever agree which was honest. Time itself seemed to tighten. Camilla heard the first drop find the lintel above the door, and the second slide down the pane like a finger. She put her palm to her throat and told herself to breathe. "Anya," she called, "light the middle lamp only." The maid struck the match. It hissed like a secret. In that narrow glow the parlor looked smaller, every curve of carved walnut a shadow pretending not to move. A letter lay open on the escritoire. The paper had a city smell, coal and damp ink and the faint tang of 1,000 hands. Jonas's hand had always been neat, but this script wasn't his. It named 3 patients, 3 nights of waiting, the same physician summoned each time, the same mistake written differently. It said more between the lines than on them, and between those lines was the place Camilla had been living for 4 weeks. A carriage wheel scraped the cobbles outside, then paused. Silence pooled. "Don't open," Camilla whispered, though no one had reached for the latch. She moved to the mantel and turned the frame face down. The young man within, Jonas Hale, would not have argued, but she couldn't bear his steady eyes watching what tonight might require of her. The knock when it came was not frantic. It was polite. That was how she knew. "Miss Farnsworth," said a voice as smooth as lacquer. "There's a fever moving through the quarter. I must examine you." Dr. Gray never shouted. He didn't need to. "The door is bolted," Anya said, colorless as flour. "Leave it," Camilla breathed.
"Go out the back and fetch Father Vale. If he isn't at St. Albans, go to the station and find Sergeant Price. Don't stop for anyone." She pressed a small vial into the maid's hand.
"If he stops you, smash this. On the step, on the street, I don't care. He hates strong smells," Anya blinked. "How do you know that?" "Because he leaves every room smelling of nothing." The maid slipped into the dark like someone taught by fear itself how to hold a door without letting it speak. Camilla waited 3 heartbeats and then lifted the bolt. The door came open under her hand as if it had been waiting to. Dr. Gray stood on the threshold without a hat, without a drop of rain on his coat. Storms didn't touch men like him. He carried a tin wrapped in brown paper. The string was tied as neatly as a little noose. "You should keep to bed," he said kindly. "Storm nights unsettle the nerves." "I prefer my nerves unsettled," Camilla said. "It proves they're alive." He glanced at the parlor, the single lamp, the chair angled to face the door, the tea service with its spoon stacked the wrong way around. And he smiled the way a man smiles at a chessboard that has already betrayed the player across from him. "Shall I pour?" "I'll manage," she said, and did not move toward the tray. He set the tin down, peeled the paper without looking, and lifted the lid. The faintest breath of almonds leaked out like a ghost, apologizing for being late. "You're bold," he observed. "You're late," she replied. The storm pressed its ear to the windows. The house remembered how to breathe without being heard. He took a step. She didn't back away. He enjoyed that. She could see him tasting it. "You've been writing letters," he said, easy as daylight. Such tidy accusations, doses that were too much, visits that began too late. Names of the poor who die with less fuss than the rich. "You think there's a pattern. You think you've found it?" "I know I have." "You're frightened," he said, to place her somewhere on his map. "I'm angry," she said, to tear the map. He tilted his head toward the tin. "Drink, and you'll be neither. You'll be gently reasonable, as everyone should be on nights like this." She reached for the cup, lifted it, and, just enough to wet her tongue, touched it there. Storms like this laid a tremor under everything, even the truth. The drop worked quick fingers through her chest, tugged at the bird behind her ribs. She set the cup down and let her knees loosen. He moved, of course he did, with that precision he wore like a good coat. His hand found her wrist. His thumb was warm. He was always warm. "You wrote too much," he murmured. "Men in the capital have little patience for women who count the wrong things." "Then count with me," she whispered, and let her weight sag. He lowered her to the carpet with a tenderness that would have photographed well. The lamp laid a thin gold blade across his cheek. He turned his face slightly to blunt it. "Jonas Hale," she said, and the name was a stone in her mouth. Where is he? Doing city work, Dr. Gray said lightly, speaking to men who understand that mercy is not always gentle. He had the look of a man who had practiced that sentence until it looked like thought. The front door opened without knocking. The house startled but did not cry out. Boots on the runner, a cough that belonged to a church more than to a man. Father Vale came in first, small but made of iron filings drawn to a true north. Sergeant Price at his shoulder, stiff with a kind of deliberate slowness that said his patience had limits and he knew exactly where they were. Between them, a woman in a dark dress with an oilskin satchel, Nurse Kestrel, whose hands were competent enough to still a shaking glass from across the room. "Miss Farnsworth?" she said, kneeling so her voice could sit right next to Camilla's ear. "Tell me what it is." Camilla let the word fight its way up through the tightening in her throat. "Valerian." Nurse Kestrel did not look at Dr. Gray when she smiled. "Good girl." She uncapped a bottle, shook drops like seconds onto Camilla's tongue, then a few more under the tongue. "Hold it there. Breathe. Don't swallow your breath trying to be brave." Dr. Gray made a show of standing slowly, hands visible. "You can't trust midwives as herbs on a night like this," he said reasonably. "We need science. We need witnesses," Father Vale said, as if he had practiced a different sentence and just now found the right one. Sergeant Price reached for the doctor's bag. The latches clicked. Inside lay instruments that shone like the inside of wrong promises. Beneath velvet, a folded paper crisp as a new sin. Price unfolded it with 2 fingers. Names, dates, a single word repeated, delayed. He didn't read them aloud. The names read themselves into the room. The doctor's mouth softened, then hardened, as if a tide had come and gone between his teeth. "You will call it crime," he said, weary and superior at once. "I call it a necessary arithmetic. The clinic needs funds. The town needs a clinic. Some lives end kindly. If they end a day sooner—" He lifted one shoulder. "Jonas," Camilla said, and it came out more breath than sound. "What did you do with him?" For the first time, something like weather moved across Dr. Gray's face. Not guilt, not quite fear, something colder. Calculation that had tripped over a stone it forgot it left in the road. "He's a boy who mistook ledgers for gospel," he said. "He made enemies of men who prefer to choose their own apostles." "English," Sergeant Price said, not unkindly. "He was warned," Dr. Gray said. "He will be quiet." Nurse Kestrel's hand lived on Camilla's pulse like a bird that had decided not to fly. "You did right," she murmured. "Said the word that bought you minutes." She looked up at Father Vale. "Buy me a few more. I'll need hot water and a kettle that remembers how to boil." Anya slid back into the room like a coin returning to a purse unnoticed. Her hair stuck to her temples. She had the wild, bright look of someone who had outrun her own fear. "The wire's cut," she said. "At the second pole." "Storm did it," Dr. Gray said. "Bored now. Storms don't carry knives," Anya said. And the smallness of her voice made the sentence larger. Price set his hand on Dr. Gray's shoulder with the sort of politeness a lid uses on a box. "You'll come with me," he said. "On what charge?" Gray asked softly. "On the kind we find when decent people stop pretending decent men don't do indecent things," Father Vale said. He didn't sound angry. He sounded tired from a long time of not saying it. They took him. The storm, thwarted, rattled something loose on the eaves as if it wanted its due. The house breathed again. Nurse Kestrel counted Camilla's heartbeats in her head and in her fingers. "If you hadn't spoken," she said, "they'd have told a prettier story of you than the one you deserve." "I wanted uglier truth," Camilla whispered. "It's more faithful." "Truth isn't ugly," Nurse Kestrel said, corking the bottle. "It's simply not dressed for company." Camilla slept the thin sleep of someone who has returned from a cliff she didn't know she'd been standing on all along. Morning came in like a thing ashamed of its own brightness, knocking softly at the glass. She woke to the sound of a chair scraping and a coat being folded by hands that knew how to fold apology. "Jonas," she said, before she saw him, and his name made the air change shape. He stood in the doorway, thinner, a healing cut along his cheekbone the color of a fading plum. He doffed his cap like a man who had more manners than money and more fear than breath. "I meant to write," he said, and it wasn't an excuse, which is why she let him say it. "You were quiet," she said. "He called it arithmetic." "He calls it order," Jonas said. "The men he drinks with call it mercy. The city calls it nothing at all." She laughed once, small and dangerous. "Then we'll call it by its name." They did. The day turned itself to their purpose. Father Vale rang the bell not for matins but for witness. Doors opened onto lanes that had been empty on too many nights when the doctor's steps had not hurried. Women came with shawls that smelled like laundry and grief. Men came with hats in their hands and dislike in their mouths, the old kind that takes too long to learn a new word. Nurse Kestrel stood on the church steps with the sun ignoring her. She read names. She said delayed without mercy. Then she said kept waiting, and the town felt something in its throat. The phrase fitted there like a shard that had finally found the place it was cut from. By afternoon, the telegraph wire hummed with sentences that had small words and heavy meanings. Sergeant Price sent a constable to fetch a magistrate who didn't owe the clinic money. Dr. Gray sat in a cell that tried to make itself look more lawful than it felt. He asked for a pen. Price gave him one and did not give him paper, and still, when evening came, the town wasn't done with its asking. Camilla stepped out into the lane in a shawl that had once belonged to her mother, and let the air say what it needed to her face. Jonas stood close enough to be counted as company, and far enough not to crowd her with the shape of everything they hadn't said. They walked. Feet know the road to the truth even when mouths forget it. The storm had washed the sky clean. The first star looked like a nail in a lid. "Will they forgive themselves?" Jonas asked. "For believing him?" she said. "Or for wanting to?" "Both. Not tonight," she said. "Tonight they will try on the weight of shame. Tomorrow they will ask who sold it to them so cheaply." At the corner by the old cooper's yard, a small boy sat on the step counting the buttons in his pocket. He looked up and showed Camilla the coin he'd warmed in his hand. "For the clinic," he said stoutly. She crouched, her head no higher than his. "For a better one," she said, "and for a door that doesn't know how to close in a storm." He considered this, nodded solemnly, and pressed the coin into her palm. "You keep it," he said, "so it doesn't get delayed." That night Camilla dreamed she was standing in a room where all the clocks agreed. When she woke, the dream seemed less likely than the day she had just lived. The next morning the magistrate came, a man with a temper he kept in a small drawer and took out only when dusting. He asked Dr. Gray very careful questions and listened hard, only to the parts that weren't meant for hearing. He set a date, and everyone felt the town's bones shift, as if the house they lived in had recently remembered how to sit up straight. By then whispers had started. Whispers are the town's other telegraph. Some had names attached, some did not. One said the doctor had a friend in the Capitol with a ledger like a Bible and a pen like a knife. Another said a coachman could testify that on 3 nights he was told to circle the square until the church bell struck twice before he might draw up to the Farnsworth door. The coachman's wife said that wasn't quite true. He'd been told to circle just long enough for the doctor's cuffs to dry. Camilla kept to the parlor while the town practiced, saying the right words in the right order. Anya stitched and pretended not to watch her. She didn't speak the fear that sat between them, that the men who preferred quiet would come to take it back. They came on the 3rd night. The house knew before anyone said a word. Houses learn your enemies faster than you do. A hinge sighed. The back door's latch, which had never creaked in its life, grew theatrical. A floorboard 3 rooms away remembered how to complain. Anya's needle paused in the air. "Go to the pantry," Camilla said softly. "Take the back stairs and out. Jonas will be at St. Albans. Bring him. And you?" "I'll be here," she said. "It's my house." "It's my name." 2 men stepped into the parlor as if they had been invited by the furniture. They wore city coats and local faces, which is the worst combination. One of them took off his hat and turned it in his hands, the way men do when they are about to say something they think will sound gentle. "Miss Farnsworth," he said, "there's no need to make this harder than it is." "Then don't make it hard," she said. "The doctor is a good man," said the other, faster. "He's done for this town what no one else would." "He kept it waiting," Camilla said. "That is not the same as doing." "The poor die, miss," the first one said, as if he were explaining rain. "They die anyway." "Not on his schedule," she said. "We can forget the letters," the second man said. "The paper can mislay things when men with the right gloves ask properly. The clinic can continue. You can be made comfortable." "Comfortable," she repeated, tasting it like a spoiled fruit. "Mercy," said the first. "Arithmetic," said the second. "Time," said Camilla. and the word left her mouth like a bird that had fed long enough on crumbs and finally remembered the sky. You men tried to hire it. You told it to wait with you at the corner until your coat dried. You taught it to come late so your hands would be clean, and then you sent it to my door. They looked at each other the way men do when the script in their pocket doesn't fit the stage. The hat in the first man's hand stopped turning. The second adjusted his cuffs and found a tremor there he did not authorize. "Go home," Camilla said, almost kindly. "Light your lamps. Sit with your wives and look at their faces and see the hunger you put there when you decided other people's breath was yours to count. Tomorrow you can come to the church and confess in words, if your mouths know how. But tonight go home. You are a girl," the second said, grasping for something he could lift. "I am the woman who told the town the doctors were never late," she said, and she did not raise her voice. "And who said it before the bell rang. They left." It wasn't dignity. It was delayed fear. She was alone only long enough to hear the kettle wonder if it should sing. The door opened and Jonas rushed in with Father Vale at his heels. Behind them, half the parish crowded the lane, the front rank pretending to come for comfort and the back rank not pretending anything at all. "Are you hurt?" Jonas asked, hands hovering like bees seeking a place they won't sting. "I am told I will be made comfortable," she said dryly. "I have decided to be made inconvenient instead." He laughed then, which was impolite and perfect. "Marry me," he said too fast, which was how you could tell he had been rehearsing it and failing. Anya made a noise like a dropped spoon. Father Vale swallowed a smile and then, failing, let it out so gently you could call it something else. Camilla looked at Jonas's face, the new lines, the old steadiness, the bruise that told a story in a simple past tense, and found in herself a soft place that had not been touched by the last 3 nights.
"Yes," she said simply.
Because sometimes the shortest word corrects the longest wrong. The trial began 2 weeks later in a room that had once been used to store grain and now stored men's small certainties. Nurse Kestrel spoke without ornament. Sergeant Price produced the paper with 6 names and the single repeated word and placed it on the table with the same care he would have used for a child asleep. Father Vale confessed from the other side, said he had pressed hands and closed eyes and told himself it was God's timing because it was tidier to believe in a sovereign clock than a corrupt physician. The town listened. Listening takes more courage than speaking, and that day it found it. When it was Camilla's turn, she did not tremble. She was tired enough not to. She told the room about a spoon that smelled of almonds and a cup that tasted like a lie applied gently. She told them about a word that had cost her her voice and bought her minutes. She told them the sentence she would wake to for the rest of her life. They were never late. He kept them waiting. The magistrate didn't pound anything. He only nodded, slow, as if he were counting seconds with his chin. "I know that kind of timing," he said. "I've seen it at auctions where the rich bid against the poor. It isn't a clock. It's a thumb on a scale." He found the doctor guilty in words that sounded like plain bread: deliberate neglect, falsification, conspiracy. The room didn't cheer. It exhaled, and yet endings don't carry themselves. You have to shoulder them home. On the morning the coach came to take Dr. Gray away, he asked to speak. They let him because mercy isn't arithmetic, and they wanted to prove it. He looked at the town, and then at Camilla, and then at a place past both where a better version of himself might have been standing if someone had drawn him with a kinder pen. "You ruined my story," he said, almost wonderingly. "You wrote it with other people's ink," Camilla said. He nodded, a man finally agreeing with himself. "It was always going to be the end for me," he said. "But not like this. Not with a whisper." "It was never a whisper," she said. "You just taught the town to call it one." They took him then, and the street took a breath it had been holding since winter. That evening the parish gathered not to celebrate but to practice being something else. Mrs. Larkin, who had buried a son too quickly, brought saffron buns even though no one had asked for anything sweet. Mr. Dole, whose hands were black from coal and guilt, stood by the door in case anyone wanted to leave and couldn't. Nurse Kestrel kissed Camilla's forehead and then did it again to make sure the first one had landed. Father Vale read a psalm and then closed the book and spoke in his own voice about clocks and mercy and the exact right moment to say a hard thing. Jonas found Camilla by the window and didn't say anything, because sometimes the kindness is in letting the silence be itself. "Do you regret the word you chose?" he asked at last.
Valerian? She said.
It isn't a grand word. It's not meant to be, he said.
It's meant to work.
She turned her face toward him and let the lamplight decide what it loved there.
There's one more word, she said.
It's small, too. Say it, he whispered, and though he meant something else, she said the right one anyway. Tomorrow. He smiled. We'll build a clinic that comes early, he said. A bell that can't be bought, a door that can't be shut from outside, and a ledger with honest ink, she said, and a waiting room where waiting isn't an alibi. Outside, the night remembered how to be gentle. The telegraph wire sang a thin, contented line like a violin tuning itself. In the lane, the small boy with the buttons ran past with his hands lifted as if to catch the moon. The house at the edge of Thistle Row felt every footstep, counted them, and for the first time in a long time did not worry who would arrive too late. Years later, because time chooses its own pace no matter how you bargain, people would tell the story wrong on purpose. They would say Camilla's last whisper saved her, that she said one word and the town turned its face. That is not what happened. She spoke when speaking cost, and the town decided to hear. The miracle wasn't in volume. It was in listening. And on nights when the wind came down off the marsh and made the lamp flames lean and the clock hesitate at the top of the hour, you could stand in the doorway of the clinic, a new door, solid oak, hinges that didn't like to sing, and listen to the quiet bustle of early arrivals. Mothers with children who would not be kept, old men who had not yet been sent to their winter, midwives with herbs that weren't ashamed to share shelf space with glass and steel. If you were lucky, you might glimpse a young nurse counting drops not as arithmetic but as mercy. You might hear the bell strike once, and then, because perfection was never promised, strike once again a hair late. And you might smile, because you'd know the difference at last between delay and breathing. On such a night, Jonas would come down the corridor with a stack of papers and the ink on his fingers and a look on his face that said he had finally forgiven himself for not writing faster. He would stop at the doorway, lift his eyes to hers, and the whole room would learn how to be quiet for a heartbeat. "Home?" he would say. "Early," Camilla would answer, and the town, having learned the price of lateness, would nod as if it had always known.